Assalamu alaikum everyone. How's everyone doing? Alhamdulillah. I won't have the challenge of the fly, because I'm not as majestic as the Maulana that spoke. But it's always challenging to speak at the end of a day, and also following such a good speaker. And I've got a third reason why I'm a little bit nervous today. It's because everything that I was going to talk to you about has largely been covered already. So as I talk today, you'll hear consistency around the message. Maulana spoke about building platforms. Others spoke about not being dependent on big tech. You'll see all of these themes start to come through. So just by way of introduction, let me get my picture off there because it's a few years old. Oh, it was wrong. That way. Okay. By way of introduction, my name is Reza Suleman. Background in new business startups, technology, management consultant, and at the moment I'm a partner at a management consultancy focusing on strategy and technology. But the content for today is really just one specific area. And that specific area started when I think Ismail reached out to me a few months ago about potentially speaking at this conference. I said to him, I'm not an expert in anything, but I'm happy to help where I can. And I had this idea about, how do we use technology to amplify the voices of the oppressed and to drive positive social impact. So at the time, I wrote the brief very quickly. I sent it to him. I felt very confident. Fast forward, I think a week ago, Huda was asking for the presentations, and I was sitting there and I was like struggling to come up with the content. I did the presentation, and even afterwards, I thought, I'm stuck. Let me ask ChatGPT a question or two. And then as I got to today, as I'm sitting here, as every speaker comes, they're covering a lot of these things. So actually, a lot of what I was going to talk about has already been covered. But the message is still clear and it's consistent. And the message that I want to ask, or at least the request I want to ask from all of you for the time that you're giving me for the next 15 minutes is, even if you've heard this before, even if I breeze through all of these things, the one thing I want to leave you with is, what are we going to do coming out of this beautiful day, this session we're having? What are the actions that we're going to do? If you believe in the purpose, if you believe in driving social justice, if you believe in doing good in the world, what action are you going to take? Whether that's personally deciding, whether that's reaching out, whether that's communicating, engaging, building technology, building platforms. And I strongly encourage that we use forums like this to do those things, to build the networks, to drive actions. And that's the thing I'm going to end up with today. So in consulting, when we do strategies, we always start with, what is the case for change? What is the situation, the external environment? What are the challenges we face? How are we going to address this? What do we want to do? What are the risks? And then how do we drive it forward? What is our roadmap? So my presentation is really structured like that. It's, what is social justice in the digital age? What do we mean by that? How can we drive positive change in that environment? Is technology a source for good? Can it always be a source for good? What do we need to look out for? What sets us apart as Muslims, and how do we need to take this forward? And then most importantly, a call to action, which is, it's all fine and well to talk, it's all fine and well to get together, feel positive, think, be motivated today. The real question I want to ask is, what are we going to do coming out of this? So even if you ignore everything for the next 10 or 15 minutes, you can scroll through your phone, you can take a nap, it's 4:30 already. The only request I ask is that when I talk about the call to action, that you think either within yourself or out loud, or write it down on the cards that were given. If I believe in this, if I believe that there's a role for me to play in driving good in the world, what am I going to do about it? So that's the challenge that we all have, and myself as well. Always have good ideas. Executing is the challenge. So that's the only request I have, and I won't be offended for those sitting on their cell phones. Mr. Vadi. Okay. So in the context of what I'm talking about, I'm going to be very specific. It's not a general, how can we use technology for good? I want to talk about getting a message out and influencing opinion with the truth, and influencing opinion in the right way. So even in the morning, we started with a discussion speaking about, I think 64% of messages are false, and how do we promote that? We're living in a world, in a context where the traditional media has always been biased. I'll choose a soft word. And over the last year and a half, we've seen that. We've seen that very obviously, right? How the messages are changed, how the narrative is trying to be influenced, how there are people pulling strings in the background. Now, I guess there's always a level of that, but the level to which it's been happening over the last 10, 15, maybe even 50 years, it's just been increasing. And with the advent of social media, there's been a lot of positives around this, that you can actually use your voice to to promote justice. But even in that space, there are challenges. So the talk today is within that context, right? So we've got the power through technology, through social media, through using the platforms that we have to amplify the voice of truth. And that's really the context for today's discussion. So when we talk about social justice in the digital age, and I'm not joking, if we've discussed this today and you want to zone out for a few minutes, I'm quite okay. I'm preaching to the converted for most of this, right? You know what it is, driving equity within people, not only equality, equity, promoting the voice of justice, trying to make sure that there's justice in the world and preventing injustice, giving people the right to determination, agency, right? Promotion of people's basic human rights. So in terms of the strategy example, this is the case for change. Do we understand what it is? And I'm pretty sure we are. So as I said, I'm going to gloss over some of these things. It's already been talked about. I rather want to spend the few minutes I have to talk about the last slide, which is how do we take it forward. So in the context of us today and as Muslims, I think the way I would summarize driving social justice is really enjoining good and forbidding evil, right? And I think if we look at all the context that I've just laid out, that does give a very good summary of what we want to do. And I don't think anybody in this room would disagree with that. So if we believe that this is what we want to do as Muslims, within the context of technology and social media, how do we drive that, right? So what does it mean when we're bombarded with multiple messages, when we've got algorithms tuned to tune us out to, as Maulana just said, to, like an addiction, right, to doom scroll. So there's so many messages. Everybody's competing for our voice. Everybody's competing for our headspace with their voice. And so how do we do that? So I want to share some of the tools and tricks and effectively the hypothesis of what I believe will help land those messages and help create the social impact or the positive impact that we want to see. Okay, there we go. So there's 3 or 4 things that I would look at, but ultimately it fits under the banner of unity. Creating unity in messaging, in platforms, in speeches, etc., creates that repetition. It creates the ability to drown out the noise and have certain issues focused to the top, right? So what it requires us is to be heard. So having a platform to communicate, right? So it's no use just sitting here writing it on our page only. We have to spread that message if we want to drive the positive influence, if we want to change the narrative, if you want to raise the level of truth, you need to be heard. The second is around consistency. So there's 50,000 different messages, and we'll talk about what do we mean, what kind of messages, etc. But there are many different things. If every 5 minutes you're sharing something or you're speaking about something, it does lead to a level of dilution. It doesn't mean that messages aren't equally important, etc. But unifying that message and creating consistency in that does have power. The third is around amplification of the truth. So what are the tools and techniques that you can use to amplify that truth, to get the message out there? Because at the moment, the challenge you have is the misinformation is often spread at a higher rate or hidden under false pretenses. And so how do you create that amplification of the truth? And the last thing and the most important point would be how do you drive the power through unity, and unity in message, consistency in message, whether that be through other individuals, whether that be through organizers, whether that be through influencers, whether that be through like-minded organizations. So ultimately looking at the truth and trying to amplify it in a consistent and unified way. So with all of this, what are the challenges that we face, right? And again, a few speakers have already touched on this. So technology has really helped with this, right? The context I spoke about, which is having a phone in your pocket or having access to technology, has changed things significantly. So in the current world, though, what are we dependent on? We're largely dependent on big tech providing a set of skills and capabilities so that we can amplify the truth, which is all fine and well. They've reduced the barriers to entry, the cost of access. It's much easier today than it ever was. But I also think it's quite important for us to be aware of the challenges that this represents, right? So some of the challenges is, question what you read. So everything you see out there is not always true. And sometimes we're in tune with this, we can spot it, and sometimes we can't. The level of sophistication of misinformation is far greater than it was a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 or 15 years ago. Sometimes you look at some old conspiracies and things that have come out that seem plausible at the time, and now you look back and you say you would have seen through it. Today, trust me, there's so much information and misinformation that's coming out there, it's becoming very hard to spot. And I'll speak to some examples. Censorship, deleting content, shadow banning. Today we heard a few examples, and it's actually very shocking. So in the last week, for example, I don't know if you've heard, or Maulana just spoke about, that his YouTube channel was censored for a bit, right? For whatever reason. So he was dependent on a big tech platform to promote his message, and that had a massive impact. In the last week, 700 videos from 3 human rights organizations in Palestine have been removed. Al-Haq, Al-Mizan, and the Palestinian Human Rights Commission, PHRC. 700 videos removed from YouTube. And the reason they've been removed is because they were documenting a genocide that was then used in a court of justice to prove that. So imagine you documented the truth, you took it to a court, and you were sanctioned because of that. It's a crazy world we live in. And this is one of the pitfalls of being dependent on the channels that we seek, right? They have a different motive. A capitalist motive is very different to a Muslim's motive. So always remember that. Using platforms to promote hate speech, lies, hypocrisy, and surveillance, the list goes on. So one of the key messages is, how do we then move away from that? So being realistic. I mean, we're all working in technology, we're all using the tools, we can't live in a bubble. So what do we need to do as Muslims and professionals in technology to win our way away from that? So really what makes us different as Muslims? One of the messages that was shared, or the themes, was around haq, amplifying honesty, integrity, and purpose through media and story. That was the theme of this afternoon's talks. And that really summarizes it. Because if you think about it, the first thing, we as Muslims and as people who want to contribute to society positively, we want to make a positive impact. We've been given a level of aql, and we've got knowledge through all of us in our different disciplines here. So with that in mind, we will have to answer, how did you use that knowledge, that technology, that capability to drive good in the world? So in terms of the case for change from a strategic perspective, the case for change is made. Everybody should be aligned. Everybody is agreed. So my request and appeal today is really, how do we take this forward? And that's really the focus. Got my slide right. What can we do? So I always think of a roadmap of short, medium, and long term. So the first thing I want to suggest, because we're sitting in a room with a lot of professionals, and I also want to abuse this time to ask if there's an idea that you have, if there's something that you can do in this space, if you feel you're a good content creator, you've got a platform, etc., connect with people, make the effort, right? Don't let the connections you make today die down, and even the connections we didn't get a chance to make. There's a WhatsApp group. Ismail got some ideas about the Ummah Tech application. Use this to build those networks through the ecosystems that were spoken about to drive the change that you want. The second is, use your social media wisely. Use your voice that you have, even on the current platforms, to disseminate the truth, to push the right narrative, to speak about truth over injustice. And lastly, and this is the longer term view, which is, how do we innovate and develop our own solutions? How do we build the platform so that you're not dependent on other technology, other servers, other data centers, other social media platforms that at a drop of a hat can delete your WhatsApp? As we heard this morning, I'm still in shock. I want to ask Maulana, what did he do? Like, really, what did he do? But we know who owns WhatsApp, we know who owns Instagram, we know who owns Meta. And it's very common knowledge that there's a certain agenda being pushed. So as long as your technology platforms you're using is dependent on a narrative that's been pushed for an agenda that's against the truth 100%, you stand at risk of losing it. So therefore, how do we create the ecosystems as professionals, not just as Muslims? One of the speakers spoke about for us, by us, for everyone. So the truth is not, we don't own the truth. There's non-Muslims that speak the truth. There's Muslims that don't speak the truth. But how do we create the platforms that can be used for good, that are not controlled by those who seek it for profit and nefarious means? So again, in this community and the communities that are outside of there, how do we use that skills and technology to build those platforms? And these might not be things that happen today, tomorrow, in the next year, in the next 5 years. But if we don't take the steps and actions to start putting it in place, we're forever going to be stuck one step behind, and we're going to be talking about dependent on this, dependent on that. So the call to action, and the only thing I ask, if you take anything away from my talk today, and the actions we must take, is to decide, how are we going to take this forward? If I believe that I can use my voice and technology to help solve some of the challenges that we face, right? If I believe that as a Muslim it is incumbent on me, then the question is, what action will I take to do that? And I invite all of you to think about that, to reach out, to use the apps, use the media, reach out on WhatsApp. I'm on the group as well if there's any ideas. We've also got an initiative that we're driving with a few brothers, some of them in the room, Maulana that spoke here before, also involved. So we're trying to do these things, and we're trying to take positive steps. It's not easy, and it's not always going to result in the outcomes that you want immediately. But inshallah, if you put the right foot forward and make the intention and make the effort, a sincere and actual niyyah, I believe that we'll be able to change the narrative for good. Thank you very much. Brother.